The Godfather Part 2 released only 2 years after the original, with releases in 1972 and 74 respectively. After the critical and financial success of both installments, you'd expect Coppola and Paramount to strike again while the iron was hot. And that's exactly what Paramount wanted to do. Coppola and Puzo disagreed, however. They felt the story was done. 16 years later, though, in 1990, The Godfather Part 3 would be released. Why the sudden change of heart from Coppola? Simply put, he was broke. The 1980s were a decade riddled with failure and tragedy for Coppola. His production company, American Zoetrope, had filed for bankruptcy the same year Part 3 released. And Coppola knew that another installment in the Godfather franchise would be a guaranteed financial success. Obviously, this production was already starting off on the wrong foot, both Puzo and Coppola both returning to write the screenplay. How bad could it possibly be? Coppola and Puzo wanted to title the film The Death of Michael Corleone, which was originally the working title for Part 2. However, Paramount refused, demanding that they title it The Godfather Part 3. The reason Coppola and Puzo wanted a unique title in the first place, though, was to establish that the story of The Godfather was finished. Coppola would eventually get his wish when a director's cut would be released in 2020 to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the film. The title to this director's cut would be The Godfather Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone. Coppola explained that this version was closer to his original vision, as corporate meddling apparently played a hand in the theatrical release. And this director's cut will be the version I'm going to take a look at today for two reasons. Firstly, finding a legitimate way to stream the original theatrical release is difficult to say the least. And secondly, Coppola is at the very core of these films and knows the characters and world better than anyone else. If he originally envisioned it one way, then in my eyes, that's the way it should be viewed. Now, upon release, reviews were mixed. Some claimed it to be a decent film that simply didn't compare to the first two. Others said it was a disaster, marred by a convoluted plot, terrible script, and awful acting. Today we're going to find out if either one of these groups got it right. Is The Godfather Part 3 really as bad as some say, or is it a gem hidden in the shadow of its predecessors? Okay, I can't do this. I usually like to be a bit theatrical, build up the mystery before diving into the film, but let's just lay it all out there right now. This movie is not very good. By far the worst of the trilogy. Now, for context, I tend to be a bit of a film apologist, so when I decided to make a video on The Godfather Part 3, knowing how critics felt about it, I fully expected to stand in defense of this movie. But it's actually just the opposite. I absolutely hated it when I first saw the credits roll. Then I read actual reviews for it, and to find out they were even somewhat positive was baffling to me. I went in with middling expectations. I didn't expect it to be good, but I could have never anticipated how disappointing it was. I then began to take a look at the story behind its production, though, and things began to make a bit more sense. So to fully understand how we got this mess of a movie, let's take a look at the complete disaster that was the production of Godfather 3. When Coppola had initially declined to return for Part 3, Paramount frantically worked to create their own Part 3 with a new director. Eventually, they even got Mario Puzo to return to work on a screenplay. After over a decade of various screenplays being turned down and directors quitting, Paramount realized that they couldn't make Part 3 without Coppola, and they would soon get Coppola on board after he was convinced by his sister, Talia Shire, to return to the franchise. When it came time for casting, they were able to get most of the cast back from Part 2, those that survived that story anyway. However, there was one notable loss. Robert Duvall was offered the part of Tom Hagen, but turned it down because of the salary. He later elaborated on this, saying that if he was paid half of what Pacino got, it would have been fine. However, he was only offered around a fourth of Pacino's salary. Unfortunately, Tom Hagen was initially meant to play a larger role in this story too, so with Duvall out, the script had to be reworked. It makes me wonder though, if Hagen played such a large role in the story, why didn't Paramount make more of an effort to get Duvall on board? Coppola later mentioned how the movie feels incomplete without Duvall, and I wholeheartedly agree. He was replaced with a character named B.J. Armstrong, played by George Hamilton. Hamilton does a fine job, but Armstrong just has nothing going for him. He isn't interesting whatsoever, and the trust Michael has toward him feels completely unwarranted since, as far as we know, they have no history together. To make matters worse, it's stated that Tom Hagen passed away before the events of Part 3. This would be fine, but the way it's done makes no sense. Like I mentioned, Michael trusts this B.J. Armstrong guy. We don't know anything about their history together, but I'd be willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. After all, it's been 20 years since Part 2. The problem is that in the scene where Michael explains that Tom passed away, Michael is telling this information to BJ. So clearly they haven't known each other that long for Michael to never have mentioned his own brother. The drama regarding the casting doesn't stop there though. One of the most important characters in Godfather Part 3 is Michael's daughter, Mary Corleone. Several actresses were considered for the role. Julia Roberts was initially cast as Mary, but dropped out due to scheduling conflicts. Madonna wanted the role, but was ruled out since she was considered too old for the part, being 32 at the time. Speaking of age though, how old is Mary supposed to be in this movie? It's never stated, and I've seen conflicting reports on it. I've seen some say that she's 18, but that wouldn't make sense chronologically. She was clearly around 4 or 5 in The Godfather Part 2, and Part 3 takes place 20 years later. Either way, Madonna probably wouldn't have been right for the part. Another actress that was considered was Rebecca Schaeffer. However, the day she was expecting to receive the script, she was shot by a man who had been stalking her for years. Schaeffer, who was only 21 at the time, tragically died later that day. Eventually, Winona Ryder was cast in the role. However, at the very last second, she was diagnosed with nervous exhaustion and dropped out. And when I say at the very last second, I mean it. Left with seemingly no other options, Francis Ford Coppola enlisted the help of his daughter, Sofia Coppola. She was offered the part only a few hours before she was needed on set. Because of the uncertainty behind the casting situation previously, Sofia had already participated in rehearsals as Mary Corleone. She seemed the clear choice for the role. There was only one problem.
Why are you doing this? Why am I doing this?
She's not a very good actress. When I first watched the film, I thought she was just nervous. I soon found out, though, this was an incredibly natural performance. She wasn't nervous, this is just how she talks. This helps a bit, I guess, but it doesn't make her performance any less distracting. Now, considering the factors that led to her casting, the hate she received for this performance is unfair. Her father was even accused of nepotism for this choice, which is unwarranted considering the circumstances. Sofia Coppola didn't even want to be an actress, as she much preferred being behind the camera. Her primary motivation for accepting the role was to help her father out, which is admirable, no matter how it turned out. All that being said, though, I don't think it actually mattered who played Sofia, as there was no saving her dialogue in my opinion. Firstly, the dialogue throughout the film in general is bad. All nuance and subtlety from the first 2 parts is gone. Instead, characters plainly say what they're thinking and how they feel. The themes also lack any subtlety, being directly stated by the characters. This could potentially be due to the fact that Coppola was constantly rewriting the film on set. It could also potentially be due to the fact that The Godfather Part 3 had a strict production schedule, and Coppola was under a lot of personal stress, as he had declared bankruptcy during filming. Frankly, knowing the story behind the film's production, I'm shocked this movie was even completed in the first place. That being said, while I'm sympathetic to the conditions in which it was made, that doesn't mean I have to enjoy it. Before we get more in-depth with the critique though, let's briefly discuss the good. With Coppola behind the camera, there was no way the film would look bad. It's gorgeous and fits right in with its predecessors. My favorite shot in the film is absolutely the confession scene. It's staged beautifully and very distinct visually. There are also a lot of shots that call back to the previous films, and I really appreciated these after the journey I've been on in the past month of rewatching those first 2 films endlessly. The music is also good. It's mostly reused from the previous installments, but the tracks aren't out of place here. Finally, I think Al Pacino did a great job of delivering what the script was going for. The problem is that what this script was going for was flawed from its very inception. The Godfather Part 3 tells the story of an older Michael Corleone trying to make the Corleone family completely legitimate, just as he promised Kay in the first film. And this is where the first major problem with this story shows up. Michael isn't even with Kay anymore, and it's been 20 years since the ending of Part 2. Why is he making this move now? This is never explained. And Michael seems to be moving with some urgency in this story too, as if he's gotten some recent source of motivation. Moving on, the film opens in a similar manner to the first Godfather, with a man seeking the help of the Corleone family. It even uses the same over-the-shoulder shot. Just after this, we transition to a party, which is customary for the series.
I had a lot of girlfriends when I was 15.
8-year-olds?
Especially 8-year-olds. What?
You know, you haven't kissed me hello yet. Relatives always kiss.
Oh, now we're related.
I'm your little cousin.
What?
Yes, let's address the elephant in the room. Mary has an incestuous relationship with her cousin Vincent. Obviously, this is a concept that already alienates an audience. I don't think including taboo concept like this in a story is inherently a bad thing, though. Sometimes a story can only be told by making the audience a little uncomfortable. That is not the case here. The incest actively hurts the plot and is entirely pointless. The love story here just isn't believable either. Sofia's acting definitely plays a role in that, but in her defense, she did have to do romance scenes with her father behind the camera. Even if she was the greatest actress in the world, though, there was no way she could have pulled off some of these lines.
He's your first cousin.
Then I love him first.
What does that even mean? I don't think there was any way to deliver that line with any sort of impact. Now, I suspect the whole reason incest was even used was so that Michael would have a reason to disapprove of the relationship. But even that was already covered by his flashbacks of Apollonia and how it's too dangerous to be linked to the family business in that way. This plotline actively makes the story worse as well. During the climactic third act in what is supposed to be an emotional moment, Vincent refuses to talk to Mary since Michael forbade the relationship. This scene isn't tragic though, it's disgusting. That's enough of that though. I complimented the shots that call back to the previous films earlier, but I do think the movie does go too far with the references at times. Now, Part 2 had several callbacks to Part 1. In that story, it served more as a mirror, though. The juxtaposition between similar situations revealed things to the audience and emphasized the themes of that story. In Part 3, I couldn't tell you why these are here except to remind the audience they could be watching a much better film. The worst examples of this come during the party sequence, where Johnny Fontaine comes back for no discernible reason and Enzo is name dropped. That one doesn't even make sense either. Why is he introduced as Enzo the Baker? Is baking the only thing he's known for? Normally, wouldn't you just introduce someone by using their full name? These out-of-place references leave the whole thing feeling like a fan fiction done by someone who doesn't understand the characters or this world. All that being said, there are a few callbacks and I do enjoy. Firstly, the parade where Joey Zaza is murdered is a direct reference to the parade where Don Fanucci was killed. I thought this was a clever way of showing how history repeats itself, and in the Coda release, we actually don't know what's going to happen in this scene either. So if we pick up on these cues, we may be able to anticipate Zaza's murder.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
The second reference I liked was Michael's declining health. This not only serves to mirror Vito's declining health in the first film, but also builds anticipation for the inevitable death of Michael Corleone. At least in the Coda release, where that's the title. I also only just now noticed how both of these examples only really work in the re-release. It's almost as if Coppola is a good director, and if he were given more time and appropriate resources, he could have delivered a better product. There is one contentious change in the Coda release though, the final shot. Before we get to that though, let's set the stage. After Mary finds out that her father isn't allowing Vincent to speak to her, she confronts him about it. At that very moment though, an assassin attempts to kill Michael. 2 shots are fired. The first hits Michael in the shoulder. The second misses its intended target though. Instead, it strikes Mary in the chest, killing her right in front of her father. And in the Coda release, this death is made even more impactful. Because of the title, we anticipate Michael's inevitable death. We've come to terms with it. The shock of Mary's passing isn't lost on the audience, and we're able to better sympathize with these characters. This leads us to the final shot of the film, where we see an older Michael sitting alone in Sicily. In the theatrical release, he falls over and dies. In Coda, the scene cuts early, and just before the credits roll, we see text on screen reading, "When the Sicilians wish you Shantani, it means for long life, and a Sicilian never forgets." This frames Shantani as more of a curse than a blessing, and this is beautiful. For us non-Sicilians, this phrase was explained in Part 2, and earlier in Part 3, Michael was wished Shantani by a large crowd of people. With this added context, the tone of that scene completely changes. It makes the ending far more somber. To some, though, it was considered anticlimactic. After all, The Godfather Part 2 did the whole Michael sits alone regretting his life decisions ending already. Actually seeing Michael die offers a sense of finality, and I would be inclined to agree. But as with everything in The Godfather Part 3, knowing the context behind this decision offers some clarity. Earlier I said that the 1980s were a decade marred by failure and tragedy for Coppola. Obviously Coppola had his financial woes, but the tragedy I was referring to was a particular event taking place in 1986. On Memorial Day 1986, Coppola's son, Giancarlo Coppola, was killed in a boating incident. Now it's no secret that Michael Corleone commits some horrendous actions throughout this trilogy. The plot of Part 3 hinges on his desire for repentance. However, he must pay for his sins. Those sins are too great for even death to be a worthy punishment, though. So Michael must suffer a fate worse than death. And Coppola, having experienced such a fate, knew exactly what Michael must suffer. Keep in mind, this is all just a theory, though. Coppola's never explicitly said this was the case. With that context in mind, though, this ending is elevated to new heights. Living with this punishment and this guilt is the worst possible ending for Michael. There is also a moment earlier in the film that foreshadows Mary's death. In a puppet show, a man finds out that his daughter is in love with her cousin and stabs her in the heart. In a similar situation, Mary is shot in the chest. While Michael didn't shoot the bullet, he still feels guilty. It's as if he had stabbed her himself. Now, everything I've just said is incredibly powerful stuff. If it was attached to any other film, it would undoubtedly be considered a masterpiece. And if Coppola was given the appropriate time, freedom, and resources, I've no doubt in my mind that a masterpiece is what we would have gotten out of Part 3. As is, though, the movie is messy and frankly boring. The plot is so convoluted it's hard to get invested in it, and while I appreciate this film also attempted to tie real-life history into its narrative, it unfortunately is attached to a plotline that isn't interesting to begin with. I mentioned earlier how I appreciated Al Pacino's performance, and while it is true, what he's performing just isn't appealing to me. Michael's characterization in this story just seems off. I'm willing to accept that he simply changed over the course of 20 years, but we're never given a reason for this change. He seems to have changed just for the sake of changing. His children still love him, he's still making a living, and he's well respected. If he aims to make up for past sins, he's already acting as a philanthropist through various foundations, even if the money is through illegitimate means. And we're never given a reason to root for him turning to legitimate business anyway. In fact, that whole plotline just establishes the fact that even legitimate business is marred by shady dealings. So it seems to not matter where the money comes from anyway. The whole thing seems a bit half-baked narratively. Is The Godfather Part 3 a worthy ending to the Godfather trilogy? In spite of everything else I've said today, I would say that it is actually. When looking only at the ending itself, I think it actually leaves things in a good place. It's emotionally powerful and wraps up the tragedy of Michael Corleone very well. That being said, is it a flawed movie? Absolutely yes. I wanted to love Godfather Part 3, but there's just too much wrong with it for me to forgive it completely. And that really is a shame. Either way though, I'm glad I was able to discuss one of the greatest film trilogies to ever exist. Both The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2 have cemented themselves in my top 10 movies of all time, and I doubt they'll be moving anytime soon. At the time of me writing this, I don't really know what's next for me, but I hope you guys enjoyed this trilogy of videos. Let me know if there's any other film series you'd like for me to cover, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching.